It began as a hushed conversation deep within the private corridors of Kensington Palace, an exchange so tightly controlled that even senior aides refused to document it in official logs. Yet, when Catherine, Princess of Wales, emerged moments later, her expression told a different story entirely. Something irreversible had been set in motion, and at the center of it all was a quiet reference to Princess Charlotte that no one was meant to hear. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Inside the normally disciplined rhythm of Kensington Palace, that evening unfolded differently. A sealed-door consultation was convened without the usual ceremonial notice, bringing together Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and a small circle of senior royal advisors whose presence alone signaled unusual gravity. The language used was deliberately restrained, almost coded, with references to what officials later described only as a sensitive generational stability concern. Yet even within that careful phrasing, the implication was unmistakable. The discussion was no longer about routine planning, but about safeguarding continuity under pressure. Every communication channel linked to the household was quietly instructed to limit internal commentary, a move rare enough to unsettle even experienced staff. Catherine was later seen leaving the room with a stillness that unsettled those who knew her composure best, her usual measured confidence replaced by a visible fragility that palace observers rarely witnessed. Without pausing for the press corridors that typically mark royal movement, she reportedly diverted her path entirely, avoiding exposure as if the weight of what she had just heard demanded immediate isolation. Meanwhile, Prince William remained within the advisory circle long after the initial discussion ended, continuing closed consultations that stretched deep into the evening hours. Communications teams, already under unusual instruction, maintained near-total silence, a restraint that only deepened speculation among insiders who sensed that something far more structural than a family concern had just been set into motion. By the following morning, fragmented whispers had already begun circulating through the lower tiers of the palace ecosystem, where information rarely remains contained for long. The phrase, Windsor continuity safeguard discussion, surfaced repeatedly in hushed exchanges between staff who were not privy to the full details but could sense the shift in tone and urgency. Although no official confirmation emerged, the recurrence of Princess Charlotte's name within those fragmented accounts intensified speculation that the conversation extended beyond immediate concerns into longer-term institutional planning. What had begun as a private, sealed-door consultation was now being quietly interpreted as the opening stage of a broader structural recalibration within the monarchy itself, one that few were prepared to acknowledge openly. But what appeared to be a private family concern was, in reality, the first fracture in a far larger institutional decision forming behind palace walls. Behind the ceremonial calm of Windsor Castle, a quiet but urgent question began circulating among senior courtiers: who truly safeguards the future of the crown when the present is under strain? As King Charles III's ongoing health challenges reshaped the monarchy's internal rhythm, discussions once considered theoretical were suddenly treated as immediate constitutional concerns. In the long shadow of Windsor Castle's ceremonial precision, the monarchy found itself confronting an uncertainty it had long trained itself to avoid. King Charles III's ongoing health struggles did more than raise concern about succession optics. They quietly altered the rhythm of governance inside the institution. Courtiers, once confident in the steady cadence of tradition, began referring carefully, almost hesitantly, to continuity stress points, a phrase that carried no official weight but immense internal implication. It suggested that the structure itself was being tested, not by scandal or rebellion, but by time and vulnerability. Every scheduled engagement, every public appearance, Every carefully choreographed gesture of stability now carried an undercurrent of calculation. Within this atmosphere, historical memory became a governing force of its own. Senior aides revisited the so-called legacy directives attributed to Queen Elizabeth II, instructions and principles that were never publicly detailed but widely believed to guide the monarchy through moments of uncertainty. References to a Windsor legacy framework began circulating in advisory discussions, not as a formal policy, but as a conceptual anchor, a way to interpret duty when the present monarch's capacity is under strain. These were not decisions yet, but they were the early architecture of decisions still forming, shaped by caution, precedent, and an almost reverent fear of institutional fragmentation. At the center of this evolving structure stood Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose roles were gradually expanding beyond ceremonial visibility into something far more symbolic and stabilizing. Their presence was increasingly framed within internal discussions as a form of continuity assurance, a living bridge between tradition and transition. Yet this elevation was not universally embraced. Within palace circles, a quiet divide emerged between those who argued for strict adherence to historical protocol and those who believed adaptation was now essential for survival. The monarchy, long defined by unity of image, was beginning to reveal subtle fractures in interpretation. And as these tensions deepened, Catherine's name began to surface not as a supporting figure, but as a central point of reference in discussions about institutional resilience. Her composure, public trust, and carefully maintained distance from internal conflict positioned her, whether intentionally or not, at the intersection of stability and transformation. What had once been seen as supporting duty was now being reframed in quieter rooms as something far more pivotal, as if the monarchy itself was slowly aligning around her presence without fully acknowledging it. And as these quiet discussions intensified, one name began to surface more frequently in the most sensitive conversations: Catherine herself. It was not a rebellion, nor a confrontation, but something far more dangerous inside the monarchy's subtle division. Courtiers began noticing fractures in tone, protocol interpretation, and access control between competing household factions. What was once a unified institution now carried the faint outlines of internal disagreement over who should shape its next chapter. Within the polished silence of royal procedure, tension does not arrive loudly, it seeps in. Slowly, almost invisibly. What first appeared as minor differences in administrative tone soon revealed a deeper divergence inside the royal machinery. Traditional court advisors, deeply anchored in historical precedent and the rigid architecture of royal protocol, began clashing quietly, indirectly with modernizing aides who viewed adaptation as survival rather than disruption. Neither side openly challenged the other, but their decisions began to drift apart in subtle yet unmistakable ways, as if two versions of the same monarchy were beginning to form in parallel. At the center of this quiet divergence stood the question of Catherine's expanding public role. Her presence, once carefully defined within supportive ceremonial boundaries, was increasingly being interpreted through different institutional lenses. For some, her visibility represented continuity, a stabilizing reflection of public trust in an uncertain era. For others, it introduced an unsettling recalibration of influence that required closer oversight. These competing interpretations were never voiced in formal opposition, yet they shaped briefings, altered recommendations, and shifted the tone of internal correspondence in ways that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, within long-standing administrative corridors of the palace, a more subtle resistance began to surface. It was not resistance expressed through confrontation, but through delay, procedural caution, and careful re-examination of established norms. Figures who had served across decades, guardians of institutional memory, approached new directives with increased scrutiny, as though each adjustment carried the weight of precedent that could not be casually redefined. Their concern was not personal, it was structural. To them, even minor deviations in protocol represented potential erosion of the monarchy's carefully preserved equilibrium. As these internal currents deepened, discussions around royal duty evolution became more frequent, though never fully clarified. The phrase itself carried different meanings depending on who used it. For some, it implied necessary modernization to reflect contemporary expectations of public service. For others, it suggested an unsettling departure from the disciplined restraint that had defined the monarchy for generations. This ambiguity did not resolve tensions, it amplified them, allowing uncertainty to settle into the spaces where unity had once been assumed. Amid all of this, scrutiny of succession communication chains increased with quiet urgency, not as a crisis response, but as a precautionary recalibration. Every message, every advisory note, every interpretive layer of authority began to be examined with heightened sensitivity, as though the institution itself was quietly preparing for a moment it could not yet define. And within this evolving landscape, one alignment became increasingly evident. Prince William, once careful to maintain equal distance from internal factions, was now perceived as gradually aligning more closely with Catherine's stabilizing influence. Their shared approach emphasized continuity, clarity, and emotional steadiness, qualities that increasingly resonated within a monarchy under subtle strain. It was not declared, not formalized, but it was visible in the rhythm of decisions and the tone of leadership emerging from their shared sphere. But beneath these quiet institutional tensions, a far more decisive development was already being drafted in absolute secrecy. Within a restricted advisory session that was never formally announced, a decision was quietly shaped that would redefine Catherine's position within the monarchy. It was not framed as promotion, nor power expansion, but as responsibility. A protective designation was being drafted, one that insiders would later describe as unlike anything seen in modern royal history. In the deepest layers of royal administration, where even whispers are measured against centuries of precedent, Prince William initiated a confidential restructuring discussion that immediately set a different tone from routine planning. This was not about ceremony, visibility, or public engagement. It was about endurance, about what remains when pressure rises and institutions are forced to prove their resilience. The language inside the room was deliberately restrained, but its direction was unmistakable. A new concept began to take shape, one that would later circulate in fragmented references as the protector of the Windsor legacy. The phrase itself carried weight far beyond its simplicity. It did not suggest authority in the traditional sense, nor did it resemble any formal royal title previously recorded in modern constitutional frameworks. Instead, it was framed as a safeguarding function, an institutional shield designed to preserve continuity during an era marked by transition and uncertainty. The discussion emphasized that this was not an elevation of status, but an assignment of duty, an anchoring role meant to stabilize the monarchy's internal structure during years of delicate adjustment. As the consultation expanded, senior constitutional advisors and members of the palace secretariat were quietly drawn into the process. Their involvement was not publicized, nor was it intended for immediate disclosure. Instead, their role was interpretative, examining how such a designation could exist within established frameworks without disrupting the carefully balanced architecture of royal authority. Every phrase was weighed, every implication tested against precedent, as though the monarchy itself was being stress-tested through language before action. Within this controlled environment, Catherine's name emerged not through assertion but through convergence. Different strands of discussion: constitutional stability, public trust, institutional continuity began to intersect at a single point. Her role within the monarchy, already defined by visibility and public respect, now appeared to align naturally with the responsibilities being outlined. It was not positioned as preference, but as inevitability shaped by circumstance. A figure already trusted by the public was now being considered for a role defined by trust at the institutional level. The framing was deliberate and precise. The emphasis remained on stability during what insiders quietly referred to as the monarchy's transition years, a period marked not by collapse, but by recalibration. The concern was not immediate crisis, but sustained equilibrium, how to preserve the identity of the crown while adapting to evolving pressures without fracture. In that context, the emerging designation was treated as a structural solution rather than a symbolic gesture. Yet the moment this designation began circulating in restricted channels, it triggered immediate and unexpected reactions across the wider royal household. Inside Buckingham Palace's administrative network, the response was immediate but carefully unspoken. No official objections were recorded, yet communication patterns shifted noticeably. Some departments slowed engagement, while others demanded clarification through indirect procedural channels, signaling that the proposed appointment had unsettled long-standing internal expectations. Within the vast and meticulously structured machinery of the palace, silence is never neutral, it is a signal. And this silence carried weight. Almost imperceptibly at first, routine exchanges began to lose their usual fluidity. Requests that once moved swiftly through established channels now encountered hesitation, delays framed as procedural caution rather than resistance. No one openly challenged the direction of events, yet the rhythm of administration itself began to change, revealing an unease that had no formal expression but undeniable presence. Behind closed doors, subtle bureaucratic resistance began to take shape across several administrative layers. It was not organized opposition, nor was it rebellion in any traditional sense. Instead, it manifested as careful re-evaluation and instinctive tightening of standards, a renewed insistence on documentation, and a quiet insistence on reviewing the boundaries of delegated authority. Each adjustment was small in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that senior observers could not ignore. The system was not breaking, it was recalibrating itself in response to something it had not yet fully accepted. At the center of this recalibration was an increasing scrutiny of Prince William's internal directive channels. Every instruction, every proposed adjustment linked to the emerging designation began to undergo a level of examination typically reserved for constitutional sensitivity. It was not distrust, but caution and institutional reflex developed over decades of preserving balance within the monarchy. The question was no longer whether the decision was valid, but whether its implementation could shift long-standing precedents in ways that might outlast its immediate intent. Within these conversations, courtiers began to quietly question the scope of Catherine's expanding responsibility. Not her capability, nor her public standing, but the structural implications of defining her role within a protective framework of such magnitude. Comparisons were drawn carefully, almost academically, to historical advisory structures associated with Queen Elizabeth II's era, when influence was distributed through layers of trusted intermediaries rather than concentrated in visible figures. Yet even those comparisons highlighted how different the present moment felt, as if the monarchy was operating under a new set of internal pressures that older templates could no longer fully contain. Informal concerns began to surface around precedent setting, a word that carried unusual weight within royal administration. Once a precedent is established, it does not simply define the present, it quietly reshapes every future interpretation of authority. That awareness introduced hesitation, even among those who were not opposed to the change itself. The concern was not disruption, but permanence, not the decision, but what it might enable in the years ahead when circumstances shift again. Throughout this unfolding tension, King Charles III was reportedly kept informed through established briefings, yet he maintained a publicly neutral posture. His position, shaped by both duty and circumstance, reflected the delicate balance of continuity he was expected to uphold. Neither endorsing nor opposing, he remained within the traditional role of sovereign restraint, allowing the institutional processes beneath him to evolve without visible interference. But while internal structures hesitated, external forces within the royal ecosystem were preparing an entirely different reaction. As word of the developing designation began to circulate beyond tightly controlled palace channels, reactions outside the immediate working royal circle became increasingly volatile. Former senior royals and distant branches of the family reportedly interpreted the move as a recalibration of influence within the broader Windsor structure. Outside the formal architecture of the palace, information rarely arrives in full sentences. It arrives in fragments, interpretations, and uneasy assumptions. And in this case, those fragments quickly spread through extended royal networks with a force that could no longer be contained by traditional discretion. Former courtiers, retired advisors, and distant branches of the family began to piece together a narrative that was incomplete but deeply consequential in tone. What they believed they were seeing was not just an administrative adjustment, but a potential reshaping of influence within the Windsor framework itself. Concerns began to surface around the shifting balance of authority inside the monarchy. Even without official confirmation, the perception alone was enough to generate tension. The idea that Catherine's role might be expanding into a formally recognized protective function introduced questions that extended beyond personality or preference. It touched the structure of influence, who stabilizes the institution, who interprets continuity, and who ultimately carries the weight of preserving the crown's internal equilibrium during uncertain periods. These were not casual questions. They were questions that reach into the foundation of monarchy itself. As the narrative moved beyond palace walls, media interpretation filled the silence with growing intensity. References began appearing in commentary and analysis describing Catherine's rising institutional authority. A phrase that, while unofficial, began shaping public perception in subtle but significant ways. The framing was consistent, not as sudden elevation, but as gradual consolidation of responsibility within a period defined by transition and uncertainty. Each reference reinforced the idea that something structural was shifting, even if no formal announcement had been made. Historical comparisons soon followed, as commentators and observers drew parallels to earlier royal restructures where roles were quietly redefined in response to internal pressure. These comparisons did not provide clarity, but they amplified curiosity. They suggested that what was unfolding was not unprecedented in nature, only in timing and visibility. That sense of familiarity layered with uncertainty created an atmosphere where every small detail felt loaded with meaning, even when the palace itself remained silent. Within this atmosphere, sensitivity around Harry and Meghan's external positioning also intensified. Any perceived shift in internal structure inevitably reignited scrutiny of how distant branches of the family would interpret or respond to evolving roles within the core institution. Although no direct connection was confirmed, speculation naturally expanded into broader discussions about influence, relevance, and alignment within the modern royal ecosystem. The silence from all sides only deepened the sense that something significant was being carefully contained. Throughout all of this, palace communications maintained a strict position of neither confirmation nor denial. This deliberate restraint, standard in moments of institutional sensitivity, had the unintended effect of amplifying speculation rather than containing it. In the absence of clarity, interpretation became the dominant force, shaping perception both inside and outside the monarchy. And yet, despite mounting tension, the most decisive moment was still unfolding quietly within the core decision-making circle. In a final closed-door confirmation process involving senior royal advisors, constitutional consultants, and select household officials, the designation reached its decisive stage. No public announcement was made at this point, but internally, the structure of authority had already shifted. Catherine's role was no longer theoretical. It was operational in scope, even if still undisclosed to the world. Inside the most restricted tier of royal decision-making, where every phrase carries institutional weight and every signature implies historical consequence, the process moved into its final and irreversible stage. Senior advisors, constitutional consultants, and select household officials gathered not to debate the concept any longer, but to formalize what had already been quietly shaped over weeks of layered discussion. The atmosphere was not marked by conflict, but by gravity, the sense that the institution was no longer imagining a change, but committing to it. Prince William's formal endorsement became the pivotal anchor of the entire structure. His position, carefully articulated within the advisory framework, did not present the designation as ambition or expansion of influence, but as a stabilizing necessity for the monarchy's evolving operational landscape. In that moment, his approval transformed the concept from a proposed safeguard into an active institutional function. It was no longer an idea circulating through channels, it was becoming part of the monarchy's internal architecture. With that endorsement in place, the legal administrative framing of the role was refined into its final form. Every clause, every interpretive boundary, every structural implication was examined through the lens of continuity and precedent. The goal was not to reinvent tradition, but to ensure that the designation could exist within it without contradiction. This required precision, restraint, and a careful balancing of visibility and discretion, ensuring that the role could function operationally without immediately disrupting public understanding of existing royal structure. As the framework solidified, integration with established Windsor operational protocols began to take shape. This was where theory became structure. Lines of responsibility were mapped, communication pathways adjusted, and internal references quietly updated to reflect the emerging designation. It was not announced, not celebrated, but embedded, layered into the system in a way that allowed it to function without immediate exposure. Within the palace, such integration is often more powerful than proclamation, because it changes behavior before it changes perception. Even as this internal alignment progressed, discussions around timing for public disclosure remained deliberately controlled. There was no urgency in presentation, only caution in impact. The monarchy, aware of its symbolic weight, often measures not only what is revealed, but when revelation will cause least disruption. Different perspectives emerged within advisory circles, some advocating clarity sooner to prevent speculation from escalating, others arguing for strategic delay until the structure had fully stabilized internally. Yet the dominant view leaned toward controlled patience, allowing the decision to settle into institutional reality before facing public interpretation. By the end of the process, internal consensus had been achieved despite earlier hesitation. What began as cautious exploration had matured into structured agreement, not through dramatic confrontation, but through gradual convergence. The decision no longer belonged to one voice or one office, it had become embedded within the collective logic of the institution itself, shaped by necessity, reinforced by stability concerns, and finalized through careful procedural alignment. And once the decision was locked within palace records, the monarchy quietly crossed a threshold it could not easily reverse. Now, as the structure of the modern monarchy continues to evolve under unprecedented pressure, one appointment stands at the center of its new reality. Catherine's designation as protector of the Windsor legacy is no longer a whisper within palace corridors, it is the defining symbol of how the institution is preparing itself for the next era. What once moved through palace corridors as cautious speculation has now settled into something far more concrete, shaping the internal rhythm of the monarchy itself. Catherine's designation is no longer treated as an emerging idea or symbolic possibility, but as a defined role embedded within the evolving structure of royal responsibility. In quiet but deliberate terms, it represents both protection and continuity, a framework designed not for visibility, but for endurance. The language surrounding it has shifted, to no longer tentative, but increasingly formal, as if the institution itself has accepted a new layer of operational identity. Within this recalibrated structure, Prince William and Catherine have become increasingly viewed as the core institutional anchors of the future. Their presence is no longer interpreted only through the lens of public duty, but through the deeper expectation of long-term stability. In internal understanding, they now represent a dual pillar of continuity, one shaped by constitutional awareness, the other by public trust. Together, their positioning reflects a monarchy that is not simply reacting to change, but quietly organizing itself around it, ensuring that transition does not become turbulence. As this role becomes more defined, the broader strategy of monarchy stability is also being reframed for generations yet to come. The focus is no longer limited to immediate challenges or short-term adjustments, but extends into the architecture of succession, responsibility, and institutional memory. Every refinement, every carefully considered adjustment, contributes to a wider effort to preserve the crown not just as a symbol of history, but as a functioning system capable of adapting without fracture. The emphasis is subtle, but unmistakable continuity must now be designed, not assumed. Throughout this evolution, palace priorities have centered on unity and controlled transition. There is an awareness that even the perception of instability can ripple outward, shaping narratives far beyond palace walls. For that reason, every internal shift is managed with deliberate restraint, ensuring that change remains structured rather than sudden, guided rather than exposed. The monarchy, in this moment, is not resisting transformation, it is refining how transformation is allowed to appear. Within this carefully balanced framework, historians and insiders alike may later identify this moment as a significant point in Windsor evolution. Not because it disrupts tradition, but because it quietly redefines how tradition sustains itself. The designation of Catherine as protector of the Windsor legacy becomes, in this reading, less an isolated decision and more a reflection of an institution adapting its internal logic to the demands of a new era. Even so, the public narrative remains something to be shaped with time. Palace strategy continues to emphasize timing, ensuring that understanding follows structure rather than precedes it. When the moment arrives, it will not be presented as rupture, but as continuity made visible, a carefully measured translation of internal reality into public comprehension. And in the quiet halls of Windsor, where every shift of power is measured in silence rather than ceremony, a new legacy structure has already begun to take hold, one defined, not by disruption, but by preservation of the crown itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.